And welcome to Let 'em Talk. I'm Paul DiRienzo. Got another great show in store for you tonight. And you might be asking, what's that beautiful mountain behind host Paul DiRienzo? And that is Mount Taylor, which is not its real name, of course. It was named after the Zachary Taylor. How many of you all know who Zachary Taylor was? He was my guest, Petuuche Gilbert, who I'll now introduce, who will explain who Zachary Taylor was and why he called it Mount Taylor and how that's not its real name and where Mount Taylor is and what's the significance of Mount Taylor. So welcome to the show, Petuuche Gilbert. He's in Acoma, A-C-O-M-A, and it's a Native American nation, commonly called part of the Pueblo Indians of New Mexico and Arizona, in the region of one of the largest, probably the largest reservation in the United States, the Navajo and Hopi reservations, and but of course the Acoma have their own, and the fascinating history, of which I've read a little bit, of New Mexico's Native population and what the struggles going back, forget 1600s here in America, going way back into the 1500s in the original days. And may I ask, where did the Acoma hide the 7 cities of gold?
We never had any gold.
Mm-hmm. No 7 cities of gold.
There were never ever any 7 cities of gold, and that was just a pretext for invading our homes and devastating all of the peoples that were in that area there. I suppose kind of like a excuse for conquering the indigenous peoples were there.
Right.
There's a document that, and I talked about this last night where we talked at NYU last night,
the indigenous
about
resistance.
the taking of indigenous people's lands. That it was a convenient creation by actual writing down the documents to divide up half of the world, and the document that the Spanish put into place. One document was called the El Requerimiento. In Spanish, El Requerimiento, the requirement. The requirement was that the indigenous peoples that you met, if they will not accept the word of God, or if they were heathens, you could kill them off and take their land and their possessions. So when the early conquistadors, the one that's infamous in that area, his name is Juan de Oñate, Don Juan de Oñate, if you want to treat him as a Don, arrives at the Rio Grande, where current El Paso is today. He unfurls this document, and the document is in Spanish would be called La Toma, literally translated, the taken. So the land and all its resources were taken for the king and crown of Spain, and then the people were to be considered vassals to the king and crown of Spain. Every village that he came to throughout this journey from modern day El Paso up they also refer to that as the journey of death, Jornada de Muerte. Every village that he encountered, he would again unfurl this document. When he gets to Acoma, that document is in Spanish history, it's known as the Obedience and Vassalage of Acoma. It was in 1598. And he writes in there that...
So your village got the honor of being specifically mentioned
in one document, the Obedience and Vassalage of Acoma.
By the King of Spain.
There his authority was used.
Yes.
And his soldier, Juan de Oñate, he reached this message to the Indian people in Spanish, of course. We don't understand. We didn't understand Spanish then. And supposedly that the 3 leaders of Acoma came before, they knelt before him and would put his hand on their hair, and they willingly subjected themselves to be slaves of the King and Crown of Spain.
And this was 1500s?
1598,
right.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's amazing if we accepted this rule of Spain over somehow willingly. 3 months later, in late December and early January, there was this huge battle at Acoma because we killed 13 Spanish soldiers. And in revenge,
there was a resistance.
Indigenous peoples were being killed off in order to show us examples that the Spanish rule will not tolerate this kind of
Right,
disobedience.
they think brutal tortures, cutting off of feet and arms. And
well, eventually that occurred. There were during this battle, women were killing their own babies because they didn't want them to be conquered and ruled by the Spaniards. Many people jumped off the cliff. But as a result of this war and killing the soldiers, we were put on trial as criminals. We were taken as prisoners of war. The punishment was the severment of feet of every man over 20 years. All the men's left foot was cut off. The women and children were all put into slavery for 20 years. And then we had visitors from Hopi Pueblo, another pueblo in Arizona. Their hand was cut off and sent back to their village as messengers, that if you're going to fight us and resist, that we're going to treat you in this way.
100 years later, there was a successful resistance.
Well, probably the only successful American revolution was the Pueblos, overthrew the Spaniards in 1680. Yeah.
Right.
So in my business card today, I still use that in the spirit, Petuuche, Gilbert, in the spirit of the 1680 Pueblo revolt.
I see.
The spirit of resistance. And that's what I want to talk about tonight. This spirit of resistance continues today in
That's
2018.
Wonderful. So let's bring it to this incredible history that we're just scratching the surface of, and take it to the modern era. And looking at the photograph that's behind us now, that people can see this beautiful mountain, Mount Taylor. That has a long history. That its traditional history as a religious site of the Acoma people.
Yes.
But also, since in a certain other type of religion, because often they talk about the atomic bomb as the brotherhood of the bomb. It's almost a religion in and of itself. Those who were part of that culture of secrecy that founded the atomic bomb, and the uranium for that bomb and for other bombs that came from the Cold War was mined in part in Mount Taylor, I'm told.
Well, indigenous peoples like to say that. The uranium that went into the first atomic bomb that was tested at White Sands and that eventually used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they like to say that, okay, uranium came from indigenous people's land in New Mexico, but probably not. More likely they came from Colorado. But yes, uranium mining occurred there over almost a 40 to 50 year period from the 40s until the late 1990s. Yeah. And so all this uranium, during its first initial exploration and use, much of it went into atomic bombs.
In the 1950s, did you have, we've played some almost comedic songs from the 1950s, and there's been movies, and there was this whole rush of people to prospect in Indian country and dug holes everywhere looking for uranium like madmen trying to get rich overnight.
Yeah. This kind of mom and pop exploration to look for uranium occurred all over the Western United States. Yeah. And as a result, today you have what's known as abandoned uranium mines. And Bureau of Reclamation says that anywhere from 13,000 to 15,000 abandoned uranium mines. All of these are devastating to land, air, water, people.
Right, because people would just dig, get a few sacks of uranium ore.
All of that, of course. It was,
and then leave the hole there.
And then leave the ground, torn up, or you've got all these drill holes that are. People say that they're in the tens of thousands of drill holes all over the New Mexico and wherever, Colorado, Utah, the Western United States.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So, do you? Is there any remediation or cleanup?
Well, how do you do that? It's probably too costly. Maybe you don't know where all these so-called abandoned uranium mines are.
Yeah.
So such low numbers. When we did the protest in Washington, D.C. a couple of years ago, Clean Up the Mine campaign, we only used, 486 abandoned uranium mines in New Mexico, the whole state of New Mexico. In the Grants Mining District where I live, where Kawashima, this Mount Taylor is, EPA only says that there's 97 abandoned uranium mines. certainly I believe that there's much, much more than 97.
Right, considering
Yeah.
the government was subsidizing, giving away money to people to go drink, even if they found nothing,
to
they
do
get
the
money.
exploration.
Yeah,
and,
right.
So yeah, you've simply got huge amounts of territory that's there's no way to clean up such an expanse of land. And even in the Navajo Indian Reservation, as you mentioned, the largest Indian reservation in the United States, there's controversy over exactly how many numbers of AUMs, anywhere from 500 to 1,000, over 1,000. Last night or a couple of nights ago, I think I heard it was more over 1,000 abandoned uranium mines.
So here we have Mount Taylor, which is not its real
Kaweshtim.
name.
Kaweshtim is the original, our Acoma name, yes.
So it's an important mountain. It's like important to the religion and to the beliefs and culture.
To the indigenous peoples, to Acoma people, yes. But you know, I belong to an organization called the Multicultural Alliance for a Safe Environment, and I've always tried to emphasize that places like this, where Mount Taylor is no longer in the hands and property of Acoma people or any of the Pueblo Indian people, even though it's sacred to us as its Aboriginal nature of it, it's also important to all peoples. And it's important, I believe, to work together multiculturally to prevent the further destruction of this beautiful place, to insist about cleaning up the legacy mines and mills that are there, in terms of groups of people, a combination of people, that we should all be concerned about land, air, water, environment for all people.
I see. Now, what is this specific? Now, Mount Taylor the mines there were in the region around it, or on it, from what I read anyway, had fallen into disuse. They weren't used. The Cold War was over. They weren't making any more bombs. Testing was over. That might start again. And now there's talk about redigging some of these mines. And then I read somewhere that they really don't want to redig the mine so much as come up with an excuse not to clean it up. I don't know.
Well, I suppose both, because there's 3 places now where they're considering doing new uranium mining. Some of them are former uranium mines. The Rio Grande Resources Corporation at this closest to Mount Taylor, in fact, it's called the Mount Taylor mine site, Rio Grande Resources Atomic Energy Company or something like that. They had something that they called a zombie mine.
A zombie
mine was half alive,
mine.
Maybe half dead, because of they had put it on a standby status. When you put it on standby status, you're just awaiting maybe the uranium prices are going to go back up, and you don't know whether it's dead or alive. And well, they just took it off its standby and it went to an active status. Okay. And of course, you have to do this all under the regulatory permit of New Mexico. And so the zombie has come alive. And,
I see.
But they have no intentions of ever mining it. That price of uranium is too low. They're not. I mean, no company is going to be crazy if it's unprofitable to operate it. So, but yet it puts us in a situation where we're fighting tooth and nail to prevent its operation, or telling them, demanding that they clean it up instead of trying to just deliberately lying to reopen it, which is not going to occur.
It seems that going by past experience, when the United States government, like it's doing now, so as to rev up its nuclear weapons production facility, they don't know an end. There's no control. I mean, they just go until, they dug all of the uranium more than they need, more bombs than they need.
Yeah. Well,
it seems.
I mean, the United States now buys its uranium from Uzbekistan or Australia.
Other countries.
Other countries. But like Energy Fields Resources, Inc. thinks that, the price of uranium is eventually going to go up, and we're going to
put
this mine back in operation. Yeah. But you realize that even this battle over nuclear power plants in the United States, where us as anti-nuclear activists are demanding closure or demanding cleanup, I think efforts are somehow, we hope that we're influencing the public to convince them nuclear power is dangerous, it's bad.
Right, and I think that so far they feel that way. However, that could change.
Well, I don't know. I heard a Gallup poll say that more than the majority of Americans think that nuclear power is bad. But it's just how do you convince Donald Trump when he issued his Nuclear Posture Review Committee last month, or in December, that say we want to spend $1.2 trillion, increasing the nuclear arsenal of America. Yeah. And listen to this. How much of this money goes into the Los Alamos National Laboratory? So we got these politicians in New Mexico all campaigning for more nuclear monies into New Mexico. We are very, very addicted to nuclear money in New Mexico.
Right.
Los Alamos National Laboratories, Sandia National Laboratories, the world's supposedly largest collection of nuclear arsenal warheads in Albuquerque, near Albuquerque in the Amazon Mountains, and this dependency upon the military-industrial complex. Right. It's crazy. But New Mexico, because again, it wants the money, is willing to now entertain high-level nuclear waste storage in Lea Eddy County.
Where the whip is.
It's near the whip. Yeah. And because the people at Carlsbad have this waste isolation pilot plant in place, they think that, we'll just increase that to above-ground high-level nuclear waste storage. So you've got this kind of people that are demanding that kind of invasion of high-level nuclear waste.
So the term, I think they call it like Nuclear Alley, that area in New Mexico and Texas too, where it would be all these nuclear companies that would be reprocessing, very polluting.
It's very, very dangerous, high-level nuclear waste. You want to bring these spent fuel rods from all over the United States by rail to New Mexico, to southern New Mexico, the northern part of Texas, right? I mean, it's right on the border.
Nuclear Alley, I think they call it.
Of that location.
Yeah, so right there at ground zero are the Acoma people and the other Pueblos and the Navajo and Hopi people and all the other different groups that are there. Sort of almost like, what's the feeling in the indigenous communities? Because throughout the United States, often you find a division between people who want the jobs.
Right.
And folks who say, who have a more enlightened view might say that the jobs aren't worth the poisoning of the population that could happen because of it. Is that the same situation where you are, or is?
I don't think so. I just think that indigenous communities are like the non-Indian communities. They're neighbors. It's a poor state. So that you've got the populace willing to sacrifice future generations for jobs and money in this generation, and the public communities are caught in that dilemma. So that's one reason we have casinos, or that's one reason that we do sell coal, oil, and gas, all for money. Even though, yes, I think the general populace of my community is sees the dangers of radioactivity, because many people are dying from what we think is various forms of cancer resulting from their work in the uranium mines or the uranium mills, and that are still spewing radioactivity, radon gas all over the countryside.
So it seems since the U.S. buys this uranium from other places where it's closer to the surface, where it's a higher percentage uranium in the ore, what we're seeing here in the Four Corners area that you're talking about now is sort of like trying to get out from under responsibilities to clean up, trying to keep bring in waste disposal type of locations, but putting it on a higher plane in a way, like, see, this is defense of America and all this kind of thing.
Yeah, I hear that. And even some of the activists, they like to use that. Okay, well, they then describe that area as a national sacrifice zone.
Oh, my gosh. It's such a beautiful area. I think the most beautiful part of the whole United States. Look at that mountain. That's one of the most beautiful mountains. Look at it.
I'm sure a lot of people have heard about Bears Ears, the national monument that was created by President Obama. Yeah. Well, President Trump, wants to, cut it down to maybe a quarter of the size, and all for exploration of oil, gas, uranium.
What about fracking and gas and things like that? I've seen aerial photographs that show New Mexico covered with the fracking.
The same way, because again, New Mexico depended so much on extractive industry, and it's oil-rich state, and with fracking technology, then taking up more oil and gas. But one of the things that I think a lot of people don't know, where oil and gas and coal laced with uranium. Uranium is all over the western United States, in many parts of the western United States.
It naturally exists
and
everywhere.
so that when you disturb the uranium under the ground by fracking, and in this case, and you mobilize the uranium, then that spreads out. And not only does it pollute the aquifers underneath, but when you bring it to the surface, then you're exposing the radioactivity into the air or into the soil.
Breathing in is the most dangerous way.
You're breathing it, or the same way when you're burning the natural product, especially coal. Then you're releasing radiation all over.
That's intermixed with the coal.
And that's why I like to use the term that we're all becoming nuclear radiation victims, because you're exposing the public at large, the whole landscape at large, by either by burning or by just disturbing it and bringing it to the surface. And people are unsuspectingly breathing in all of this radioactive pollution.
Big problem, and it has been a big problem in places like Hanford, Washington. The Yakima people are always talking
about.
Well,
if you like here where you burn a lot of coal, and if you're bringing that coal from Montana, especially, or from the west, and it's laced again with uranium, then you're really radioactive polluting people and landscape all over this eastern.
You're bringing it. You're traveling. It's going. It's falling off the coal cars on the ground and everything.
A lot of us say that wherever you mined the uranium and you transported it uncovered to the mill site, then you were polluting all the land and people along the way. They actually want to do this now in the Grand Canyon. Canyon mines.
The Grand Canyon.
The Grand Canyon.
Ripping my hair out. What the Grand Canyon?
President Obama had declared that 1 million acres or so was going to be protected from uranium mining. But forgotten was the existing mines there. Yeah. Canyon Mines was one of those. So those were grandfathered in.
I see.
Well, now Canyon Mines wants to operate now, currently, and take its ore to Utah, White Mesa Mill, the only operating mill in the United States, White Mesa Mill.
For uranium.
For uranium. So you take the ore out of the south rim of the Grand Canyon and truck it up to maybe 200 miles up to.
Well, that'd be a very dirty road from
up to Utah.
Right.
Yeah, and Navajo, you have to go through the Navajo Indian Reservation, and Navajo had enacted a law preventing uranium mining or preventing uranium transportation through their land, but because of the United States, you cannot prohibit it on the national highways.
And didn't that happen? The Nez Perce in Idaho were trying to prevent nuclear waste from being driven through their reservations, and they were a few years ago. I remember they were holding arms and blocking the roads. And everything.
I mean,
their own reservation.
The same thing where, again, because of the power of the United States. And you have your rule of thumb over Native peoples and their lands, territories.
What does that
say? They can do what they want.
What does that say about native sovereignty? Because native sovereignty, a lot of native rights are based on indigenous rights are based on the fact that treaties were made before the United States existed, which have to be recognized by the U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Recognized peoples as actual nations, and yet now. Then they sent everybody to schools and tried to Americanize them, and that didn't work. What's happening now?
Yeah. Well, you have to believe that, I believe that because of colonialism, because of the principle of discovery and conquest, and this imposition of laws and policies over the dominion of the indigenous peoples, you are no longer sovereign. You are no longer self-determinant. You live at the whims of the federal government, and you have a whole title and codification of U.S. law that determines how you're going to exist as indigenous peoples on your own homeland. Right. And so again, we're ruled. We're subjected to the rules and policies of the invaders and the oppressors. That's why I call us prisoners. I used that term last night. Prisoners of democracy on our own land. We live in an occupied homeland.
Surrounded as well. And we've had some positive. In North Dakota, we had the pipeline protests there to try and prevent. It failed, but there seemed to be a sparking new unity because you had indigenous people from all over the country and a lot of young people really moving in, and a whole new generation of activists you saw in Cannonball and in North Dakota trying to stop that pipeline and Dakota Access Pipeline, right? Is that
right?
I don't know if
yes.
Right, Dakota Access Pipeline. So although it failed, there seemed to be I got a feeling that maybe a new kind of movement is being launched. Do you feel that at all?
Hopefully so. I mean, these kinds of activities, battles have always been ongoing. You have a continuing war of indigenous peoples against their invaders, against the conquerors. And so it's just another battle. I believe it's going to continue. and it's always been over land, or the violation of treaties that supposedly recognize the territorial rights and land rights of the indigenous peoples. It's always been this fight over land, and of course, because from your land emerges the people, the right of a people to survive.
President Trump is an obvious advocate of tribalism in the negative sense, in the sense of all people being apart and each group just thinking what it can do to benefit itself and the heck with their neighbors and the heck with everybody else. What you're talking about, like a multicultural, bringing together diverse coalitions, do you see the possibility of bringing together diverse coalitions that involve like Native people, descendants of Europeans and settlers, and African American people and Latino people, considering this complex history that you were discussing?
I suppose ideally it could be like that, but sometimes it's almost like a utopian dream if you're going to think that all people are going to live civilly and recognize and somehow respect each other. I like to look at it as everybody can be who they are, whether it be Donald Trump or everybody can have their own attitudes, but you have to respect that kind of person. You have to respect that kind of man. You have to respect your oppressor as in terms of trying to understand and what I call living in a manner of peaceful coexistence. Allow each other to be who they are. Right. I believe that.
But when they have the target hairs on resources on your land, exactly. It's underneath your house.
That's why I alluded to it as almost as utopian. Maybe they can't.
So you see a struggle, basically.
Definitely.
This is a defining part of American society, of Native society from now on, since the days of the Spanish coming, is a struggle. Right, to keep your land, to keep your rights, and expand them if possible, defend them from attack.
It's a continuing war.
Yeah.
Again, it's a battle over who you want to be as indigenous peoples. And really the ultimate goal, I believe, is what we were once, sovereign and truly self-determinant. Right. That's, I believe, is the goal. But even we fight amongst ourselves as indigenous peoples over what, how do you get there?
Half a minute to go. Anything you'd like to add? How can people get in touch with you and learn more?
It's
get involved?
Not so much as how can we get allies and supporters, but it's understanding and what I was talking about in respecting each other to be who we are. I respect you. Like I said, I think I respect Donald Trump. I respect the United States, but we have to understand that we live under colonial domination, and that the United States is still keeping us in prison by their laws and policies.
Petuuche Gilbert for joining us.